Welcome back. Now, the local citrus industry is squeezed by a long-running dispute with the EU regarding exports. South Africa has approached the World Trade Organization to find a lasting solution to restrictions imposed as a result of citrus black spot and false coding moth. As things stand, South Africa has engaged the EU on this for over 2 decades. No amicable solution has been found. Justin Chadwick, who's CEO of the Citrus Growers Association, joins us now with more detail. Justin, a pleasure. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me on the show.
Wonderful, Justin. Maybe you can just give us a brief background, I think, just to bring us up to scratch about just the journey that, we've been on before even approaching the World Trade Organization.
Yeah, so the EU is a very important market for South African citrus. About 35% of our citrus goes there. But unfortunately, the entry measures, in other words, what the EU require us to do in order to get our fruit there, become more and more onerous over the years because of the two pests that you mentioned, false coding moth and citrus black spot. So in the case of citrus black spot, it's been 2 decades now that we've been engaging the EU on the fact that the fruit is not a pathway. In other words, citrus black spot cannot go on the fruit from South Africa to the EU. So that's been a long-standing dispute between us and them. And then on false codling moth, it was only deemed a quarantine pest in 2017. And we think that the measures that we have in place are enough to mitigate the risk of infection in the EU. So on Friday, a very important day for South Africa and for the citrus industry, when the dispute settlement body met and decided to go ahead with the formation of the 2 panels on these 2 pests.
Very interesting indeed. I'm keen to find out what are we asking the World Trade Organization to do for us at this point, Justin?
Yeah, so obviously we'd have preferred that the EU and South Africa had agreed on the science and come to a resolution in terms of what the correct measures should be. But they didn't, and so Minister Patel called for consultation. So in terms of the WTO process, the first step is that you have consultations. In other words, you try and reach agreement between the 2 parties without having to go any further. But these consultations did not result in any meeting of the minds. And so the next step is the formation of a panel. So in other words, the 2 parties can't agree. So you find 3 experts on a panel, and those 3 experts will then consider all the inputs from the 2 parties, from the EU and from South Africa. And at the end of that process, they will deem which of the parties is correct in terms of what the dispute is about. So on Friday, the dispute settlement body agreed to the formation of those 2 panels. And I think they have about 35 or 45 days to form the panel. Then the panel considers the inputs from all the different parties, and it's about a 6-month process. At the end of that, they will then come up with their findings.
How much has it cost South Africa's citrus exporters to keep up with this regulation? Have we managed to quantify that?
Yeah, and that's the biggest problem. I mean, if it was a low-cost exercise, it wouldn't be an issue. We would comply. The calculations done by the Bureau of Food and Agriculture Policy, BFAP, are that it's costing our growers about 3.7 billion rand per annum to comply with these measures. And it's really frustrating because in the case of citrus black spot, it's merely a cosmetic issue. And so the growers are expending a lot of money in terms of compliance, and also huge hassle factors, because if you get an interception, in other words, if a consignment is found with one of the pests in the EU, you have to redirect all product from that orchard or from that farm. So it's a massive cost if there is an interception, and it disrupts the whole export program.
Also interesting here, I think, is to maybe understand, Justin, do you have an idea of why we're not able to meet here in terms of, the science? Because, of course, this is all about really the science.
Yeah, and that's once again a huge frustration. If you look at citrus black spot, it only occurs in certain countries and it doesn't occur in the European Union. So all the citrus black spot experts in the world are either in South Africa, in the USA, or Brazil, or Australia. And all of them come to the same conclusion that the fruit is not a pathway. It cannot go on the fruit to the EU. But the EU, whose scientists go to libraries to look at the pest, they come with a different conclusion, and their conclusion is that it is a risk. In the case of false coding moth, it's often called the African moth because it's only found on the African continent. So there, once again, the EU have never really researched that insect that closely. And yet their scientists come up with a different finding from our scientists. So unfortunately, we have tried. The government has tried on numerous occasions to engage with the EU to come to a solution that is acceptable to both parties, but it's just been impossible.
Another interesting one here, I guess, also is the issue of the relationship between ourselves and the EU. And of course, now that we are with the World Trade Organization, the matters being heard there at the panel, are we expecting that there could be strain? Is this an amicable process that could result still in a mutually beneficial and healthy relationship?
Yeah, that's always a risk. But, going to the WTO dispute is not an aggressive stance or adversarial stance. It's going to a party that is neutral, that will be able to come up with a solution that actually is the right solution. And it's basically trying to protect your rights. So at the moment we believe that the measures are unjustified. They believe that they are justified. So we're just going to a third party to come up with a conclusion that takes all factors into account and is independent. So we don't see it as adversarial in any way. Unfortunately, it is sometimes seen that way. But if you look at the dispute settlement body's agenda, there's all sorts of other disputes going on. It's not as if this is, anything unusual. Countries do take matters to the DSB when they cannot be solved between the two countries themselves.
Well, Justin, we'll be in touch and keen to just see how it all plays out. Thank you so much for taking us through this one this afternoon. That was Justin Chadwick, CEO of the Citrus Growers Association.